We began our exploration of the Jewish tradition by looking at the documentary hypothesis, which questioned the authorship and dating of the 5 books of Moses. In a similar way, scholars of the New Testament have suggested that the 4 Gospels were written actually 40 to 60 years after Jesus' death, and not by anyone who directly witnessed the events. One of the reasons for reaching this conclusion has to do with the idea of 3 of those Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, being regarded as synoptic Gospels, which is to say that they share a certain body of material. If you look at the image over here on the screen, you can see that 76% of the book of Mark, which is regarded as the oldest of the 3, is used within both Matthew and Luke. In a similar way, you can see that Matthew and Luke share about 25% of their material, which goes back to a source which scholars haven't identified but refer to as Q. So the idea is that there may have been some eyewitness accounts, but that different authors at different times with different purposes and perspectives develop these 4 different Gospels to make their own arguments. The Gospel of John is not included in the Synoptic Gospels, obviously because it doesn't share the same body of material, but John is really quite different from the other 3. Rather than a more straightforward account of the life of Jesus, it gets into some very philosophical material. Consider, for example, the opening line, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That means that the Word, which is Jesus Christ, Logos in Greek, that Jesus was not just born 2,000 years ago, but rather existed with God at the beginning of creation. That would, of course, create some questions about the unitary nature of God, which would eventually get resolved in Christianity through the doctrine of the Trinity, which we'll talk about in a separate lecture. The point for now, however, is that this is a different way of thinking about the text, and what we're going to focus on first is the Gospel of Matthew, which is traditionally regarded as a Jewish gospel because it pursues some very Jewish themes, and it will be a nice way to connect the Jewish tradition that we have just finished into this newer tradition called Christianity. In that way, by looking at this Jewish connection, we can then go on and see how Christianity grew and moved away from that Jewish perspective and towards developing its own distinct Christian identity.